Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023. As I mentioned, day before Thanksgiving. Probably should have waited until this point to bring that up, but nothing happening at the moment in KITM World Headquarters Studios, but we anticipate our annual You Have to Listen to What's Going On in the Kitchen show, which only adds to the holiday ambiance. What are we doing Thursday and Friday? Unlikely that we'll find any quiet periods to record additional material. Unlikely that I'll really feel like jumping up and getting out of bed at 9 o'clock to do another show those 2 days also. So I don't know exactly what we'll do. Maybe we'll just record things with more kitchen ambiance behind us. I'm torn and I don't know what to do. But I know what to do today, and so does Greg Dworkin. He'll be here with his usual pundit roundup. It's Wednesday, just the same for him, but Thanksgiving tomorrow. Time to check in on the hints that Justice is dropping about stories that are on his mind, whether he gets to cover them in the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy or not. Always up in the air, but let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay, I did see this one. Joe is to blame for the high cost of free-range luxury spa avocado toast turkeys. Again, that has to be what it is. I saw this circulating on social media. I guess, I don't know who, but somebody took the time to go on Fox and lie. I know, it's amazing. You'll never believe it. But it did happen. Somebody went on Fox News to talk about the, holiday cheer, I guess. And of course, their narrative is that the economy is terrible and Joe Biden is to blame. And whoever it was, Jason Chaffetz, thank you. Yes, Justice. Remember him? He used to be in Congress for a while. And then something happened and he broke his foot. And that was why he left. But didn't he have to wheel around in one of those carts for a while with the one leg up? Anyway, he's left Congress because he sucks and nobody wanted to vote for him. And he went on Fox News because that pays more. And I think he just basically launched into a story about how outraged he is about the state of the economy. I've just gone to buy my turkey, you people on Fox News, whoever was hosting him. And my God, Joe Biden, what have you done? It was $90 for me to buy a turkey. It's an outrageous price. Now, turkeys don't cost that, and there's almost no way to make a turkey cost that much unless perhaps you've had it prepared for you. It might be fully cooked and is being delivered by a catering service, something like that. But he made it sound like he went out and bought a frozen turkey at the store, as we all do. Some people pay a little extra to buy fresh, never frozen turkeys, but there's no way to get that turkey to $90. Even Ebenezer Scrooge knows that much when he bought his turkey on Christmas Day. Probably one of the most inflated prices you're going to get. Anyway, by the way, the butcher shop was open that day. How do you like that? Anyway, yeah, so he claimed that who have spent $90 on turkey. Turkey price is nothing like that, of course, and people are buying their turkeys for $20 less, considerably less in some cases. They're on sale, as a matter of fact. If you ask the economists, they'll tell you, well, actually, the turkey prices are down by 5.6% this year over last year, and it happens to be true. But that's how you make a splash on Fox News. Although, why Fox News audience doesn't say, everybody just bought a turkey. We all know what the price is. But people either don't pay attention or they say, well, that must be it. Or Joe Biden must have intervened with an executive order raising the prices of turkey drastically after I bought mine. I just went and found it to be 29 cents a pound. But this poor guy, obviously the victim of price fixing by Joe Biden. I don't know how people fit that all in their head. Let's see. What's the other hint here? Stephen Miller is suing Macy's for not hiring him to be the Great White Hope Balloon. I've recognized some issues that they tried to create around the Macy's parade. I think probably over LGBTQ plus inclusion in the parade, because as it happens, Macy's is a store and they sell lots of different kinds of things, and lots of different kinds of people want to buy their things there. And these folks of all kinds are customers, and they recognize that and think that it might be good business. And it doesn't hurt that they're in New York either and are pretty obviously going to come in contact with people of all kinds, and they want them to shop in their store. It's kind of capitalism. But as you know, in certain times, ultra mega capitalists hate capitalism when it becomes inconvenient. And so there you have it. Let's see. Oh, and another hint now being dropped as well. Something from, I don't recognize. What is this social media platform you're sending me to? There's Nazis or something. All right. Oh, here's Stephen Miller's tweet about it. We just filed a new federal civil rights complaint against Macy's. Read all the details below. Do you want to? He's quoting from America First Legal, the group he uses to do this stuff, to pay for his hobby. Before you tune into the Thanksgiving Day parade or go Black Friday shopping at Macy's, you should know that Macy's appears to maintain policies that perpetuate illegal racial discrimination, denying career advancement to white straight men. Oh, okay. They must have hired and promoted somebody who isn't a white straight man. And I don't know how that even reaches Stephen Miller, but I thought it was something about the parade. I know that people made some sort of complaint about inclusion in the parades, and the parade committee pretty early on told them, yeah, you're going to have to F right off with that. We got this all set, and we're not changing it. So also inside the store, it turns out, not just the parade. Macy's, I guess, doing the right thing and being victimized by bald Dracula over here, who has made a hobby and a living somehow out of perpetually suing people because of what a hellhole America is. All right. Well, I think I got most of that stuff more or less correct. I guess not, or else Justice wouldn't have sent me the Twitter item so that we could get it actually right. But it does involve Stephen Miller and Macy's, and he's a jerk. And I guess if you need to buy a scarf for somebody, by all means, Macy's is a fine place to do it. If you need a fire truck, though, Gimbals has it, and for a pretty good price, too. Or was it a fire truck, wasn't it? Okay. Well, anyway, Miracle on 34th Street, yada, yada. Here comes Greg Dworkin to straighten us out and get us back on track so that we can actually talk about the news and things surrounding it. So here we go. Anything, any culinary activity at your house yet, Greg?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll start making pies, I suppose, today, and we'll go from there. One thing about seeing my grandson frequently is I have his cold again, so hopefully my voice will last through the hour. But let's at least try for 7:30, 9:30, 10:30, whatever.
Okay.
On the 30th.
We'll take what we can get on a almost holiday.
Depending upon where you live, it's that time. But the big news yesterday, of course, is the Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
Yes. Not
and
the parade.
The remarkable thing to me is how hard Biden and Anthony Blinken, in particular, worked to make this happen.
I can't believe it. The rest of us were watching the clock all week, and they were working.
They were yelling at Biden, you have to do this, you have to do that. He said, we're working on it. And that wasn't enough. And so naturally, you have to blame Democrats because, I don't know why, but you do.
Yes.
And so
tradition.
Republicans have no agency here. They don't in Congress. They don't anywhere. If something has to be done and responsible adults are responsible for doing it, it's Democrats.
Yes.
So what
Even
did
Biden
do? He dispatched Blinken to make peace. And he wound up doing shuttle diplomacy with Qatar and Egypt and a whole bunch of other people. Turns out that the U.S. has excellent relations with Egypt and Qatar and Jordan and Israel, but not Hamas. So Qatar had to be the intermediary.
Okay.
And with
that's
very
a problem.
difficult negotiations, things happen. And so what's happening now is starting now.
Right now?
First tranche of hostages should be released. And depending upon how that goes, the ceasefire will last for 4, 5, or maybe even more days.
They should have gone for 8, I think, just seasonally speaking. But,
yeah, I suppose.
But that would have been biased toward one side, I suppose.
Well, it'd be a miracle. But the thing is that this is not something necessarily that Bibi Netanyahu wanted.
No.
He's a bad guy. but he's got
Yes.
even worse people in his cabinet.
Oh,
And
yes.
the two names that always come up that are like really bad guys are the thugs, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich.
Yeah. Now, are they technically currently not in the
They're not in
cabinet?
the war cabinet.
Yeah,
but
they're
the
in his regular cabinet. He chose them. That was what
He's
he
got
wanted
36 people in his regular
to.
cabinet.
Oh, that's a large cabinet. Okay.
It's like,
but those guys are, yeah.
like every other person in Israel's in his cabinet.
They're
So,
supposed to be treated seriously, even though they're crazy. They're
Right.
in the cabinet. You're right. Okay.
so Biden wants this to happen. He puts a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants this to happen because he wants to be seen as a war president who can bring peace, because anything that helps him is good.
Anything as in his trial is good.
And he's putting his interests above everything. But he has a stake in it. The hostage families want this to happen. He's getting a lot of pressure from them internally.
He
He's
doesn't
getting
even
a
care
lot of
about
pressure from the U.S. and other countries externally. Typically what happens is that when Israel goes to all-out war, the rest of the international community says, no, you really have to tone it down and stop.
Yes.
That almost always happens. That's happening here, of course, as well. So
That's the nature of
yeah,
those
he's trying to
conflicts.
balance all
Yeah.
these different pressures. I don't mean to make it sound like he's doing it in a statesmanlike way. I mean, he's desperate because he's being cornered on all sides, is what I mean.
Okay. I think that's fair. I mean, naturally, if he were here, he would disagree and talk about what a statesman he is, but
Of course.
everyone
so,
would take that
So now,
as they should.
he said,
with a
first,
huge grain of salt. Yeah.
I'm going to talk to my war cabinet. And then an hour later, I'm going to talk to my security cabinet. And then an hour after that, I'm going to talk to my regular cabinet. So it was expected to be, a 3-hour discussion, turned into 10 hours.
Oh.
As some Israeli observers said, that's because Netanyahu has to prolong this to make it sound like only he could negotiate this difficult situation. However, what happened, the final vote was 33-3 for the truce. And the one faction that voted against it was Ben-Gvir's. Even
The last
Smotrich's
guys he talks
faction
to.
voted for it.
Oh.
After complaining about everything for like 6 hours, he said fine.
Uh-huh.
But Ben-Gvir, who is buying U.S. guns to supply to the settlers for terrorism on the West Bank,
Yes.
didn't want to vote for this because there's factions within Likud, within the right wing, that want all that war, and they don't want to stop, and they don't want this international, you always tell us to stop this time or not. And so that's what Netanyahu had to balance. Now, Biden had to work his way through all of this, plus whatever was happening on the Arab side, which almost never gets covered in the U.S.
Right, true. Okay, I think that's largely fair.
Let's just put it this way. It's hard. If it were
Yes.
easy, it would have happened years ago.
Or the whole thing wouldn't have happened.
But guess what? Biden pulls it off.
Huh.
And so does he get credit for it? Well, of course not.
No, and the turkey price went up.
Right. Well, the turkey price went down. He did pardon a few. That's probably why.
Oh.
Yeah,
really,
one of those
economics
turkeys is
would
so
have said
big.
the
It
supply is
itself is
higher.
probably enough to bring the price down.
That
But,
could be.
it's not just turkey. There's a whole bunch of other prices that are coming down as well. Interest rates are dropping. Price of oil is dropping a lot. It's the lowest in a year and a half, maybe 2 years. Certainly in a year. Individual prices are dropping. The egg industry got caught gouging.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
That was actually
we
a
all
case
saw
that
that,
was
really.
brought during the Obama years when Biden was VP. But, why do we have so much inflation? Well, part of it is price gouging. So
as
Biden's
it turns
doing all
out.
of these things. Does he get credit? No, because he's old, and besides, I want a pony.
Pony price is also down.
Yeah,
So it's possible.
Pony rides are cheaper now. So, there's a whole lot of like tear your hair out frustration, but we understand that you never really win, quote unquote, on international relations. Foreign
Yeah, you
policy
just do the
doesn't
job.
win elections. It's domestic policy that does. Nonetheless, he may be old, but he's experienced, and this is where it shows.
Yeah, all right. I don't imagine much in the way of results had Trump been in charge of this.
Well, that's the thing. You have to compare it to, compare it to what? All right, you think that these prices are low? Well, let's compare them to 1960. Well, all right, fine.
Well, no.
Oh, how about comparing it to 2 years ago? All right. In some cases, they're better. In some cases, they're worse. Okay, fine. But if you get to play that game, then you also get to play the game of, all right, well, Biden is handling the Israel-Hamas situation, not in a perfect way, the way I see it, because he's too close to Israel. Well, he got these results by doing it his way. Okay, But compare that to, I don't know. Compare it to Oslo Accords. Compare it to the end of World War II. Compare it to,
End of world. Wow.
compare it to what? Why don't you compare it to what would happen if Trump were president and how he'd handle it?
That seems...
He would tell Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the other people in the Israeli cabinet, go ahead and nuke.
Oh, yeah. Oh, on your side. Sure, absolutely. There's no doubt. I mean,
there is no doubt. And so that's why when elections come to be a choice, this kind of stuff matters.
Yes.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
And a good point, I think, made this morning by, I believe, Spencer Ackerman was watching this stuff, and I saw somebody retweeting, or whatever the hell we're doing now, his comment saying, by the way, keep an eye on things. Obviously, you're going to have to keep an eye on things in Israel regardless, even during this ceasefire, because the ceasefire by its terms doesn't appear to apply to activity in the West Bank, only in Gaza, which is the focus here. But I wondered whether maybe the ultra-right wing factions that either went along or were just simply outvoted on the pause did so knowing that essentially the settlers would be crossing their fingers behind their back and saying, well, we're not killing people in Gaza. That was the agreement. So I don't know. It's not a fact yet, but it's certainly a fact that West Bank settlers unlikely to believe they're covered by that ceasefire. It's not Hamas in the West Bank. We're not Gaza.
West Bank settlers are a problem.
Yeah.
Settlers are a problem in East Jerusalem, where
Yes.
they're trying to take over the Armenian quarter.
Yeah. And boy, do Armenians not like it.
There's a whole lot of stuff that still has to be, righted in this listing ship here. But, it's definite progress, and at least
Yes.
moving in the
we'll
correct
take
direction.
this.
Now, you still have a right-wing government in power.
Yeah.
As long as that's the case, West Bank settlers are going to feel like the government has their back. Although this sort of thing has to give them pause, just like it gives, everything else pause. So today is the day the first hostages are scheduled to be released. Some of them will be dual citizenship. That means some of them will be Americans. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So I think about 50 or so slated for release is the report I heard the other day.
In tranches. And then maybe another 10, and then maybe another 10.
Mm-hmm.
And at least 10 of those are supposed to be dual citizens. So, again, we'll see. Other things that the U.S. is trying to balance in the region is keeping Iran out of it. That's why all the warships and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And so far, okay with that. And, all of that. So, a very complex situation that Biden is trying to juggle and doing a reasonably good job. And he's paying a lot less attention to Twitter and a lot more attention to what's going on in the international front. Now, personally, I think Anthony Blinken should be his campaign manager so he could balance all the different factions in the Democratic Party. And after long and fruitful but difficult negotiations, I think we can get back to where we need to be.
Yes. The 10-hour thing is probably, I guess, was that like the Iowa caucuses?
Right. Carl Quintanilla points out this morning in a different venue here, business spending update, core capital goods steady, rising slowly. He points out the price of crude oil has come down. Oil prices tanked nearly 4% on Wednesday as OPEC producers delayed a meeting, raising questions about the future course of crude production cuts.
All right. I mean, we'll take, I don't know. I'm not even certain what was just discussed now that I think about it. OPEC countries said what?
OPEC said they're not going to meet, and so we're not going to cut
all right, so
production. Therefore, we're not going to raise prices. Therefore, the price of oil dropped.
All right.
Therefore, the price of gas
I guess
will
I should
drop.
take that then. Well, I don't know about that.
It will.
It's supposed to work that way.
That's what Gas Buddy says. So, he's pointing out this is low gas prices. While Quintanilla is also pointing this, U.S. mortgage rates slide sharply, reinvigorating housing demand, capping the biggest 4-week slide in nearly a year. And in the last 24 hours, U.S. gas prices are falling, could hit the cheapest Thanksgiving Day price since 2020.
You need that gas today.
American shoppers have plenty of dry powder. U.S. Consumer Dashboard, November, thankful for a strong consumer. Just Good economic news all around.
Okay.
So it's really hard to make the case. No, we're really in a recession. You don't understand.
$90 turkey. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, some people are going to make that case anyway. I'm glad it was immediately obvious as ludicrous to us. I do wonder whether you sometimes wonder about that. Does the Fox audience say, what the hell is he talking about? Or do they just say, move on, give me something else? Red meat. This is all about white meat, and I want red meat.
Yeah. So, again, I'm not sure all of that sinks in. But that's the state of the art at the moment. That's what's going on.
Well, all right. That's many things, and we can handle it. And there's a lot of interesting, a lot of things happening around the ceasefire, including the change in terminology of what constitutes a ceasefire. I guess this is just
what's a pause, what's a ceasefire, what's genocide, whose side are you on? I came across a cartoon.
Yes.
Which I thought was wonderful because it kind of summed up everything that's going on there, which is really hard to do. Mm-hmm. And it was done by a cartoonist named Mr. Fish.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if you've seen this one.
I don't know if it's his real name, but okay. That's how he wants to be credited. He told me.
George Fish. I mean, for all I know.
All right, I don't know. But okay, that's the name he goes by.
So
that's
a mom is talking to her little girl at the dinner table. And she says, all right, so here's what's going on. In a land far, far away, there's a giant prison that's full of people who shouldn't be there at all. And the prison was built by a bunch of other people who have a history of being hated for no reason at all. And the reason they built the prison was because they thought it would keep them safe if they locked up the locals who thought they might be part of the group that hated them for no reason at all. So anyway, the leaders of the people who have a history of being hated for no reason at all have all lost their minds from the terrible stress of being prison guards for so long. And they've gotten into the unfortunate habit of doing hateful things and being horribly cruel to their prisoners who are in prison for no reason at all. And over time, that's made some of the prisoners lose their mind. And they want to be horribly cruel to the people who have a history of being hated for no reason at all. So one day, the prisoners who lost their minds left the prison, murdered a bunch of non-prisoners who shouldn't have been murdered. And the people who run the prison are planning to increase the cruelty toward the prisoners who shouldn't be in prison in a land that's far, far away, and nobody outside will know what to say because nobody wants to be accused of being hateful towards the people who have a history of being hated or being indifferent to the agony of the people who are being treated cruelly. And so I hope that clears up everything.
I see it now, and of course the humor is in the gigantic block of text. This is a one-framer, and I wonder if Mr. Fish... well done there.
Great
unless,
job.
Unless it's
really
Mark
well
R. Fish or something like that.
Yes.
That's kind of it. And you abbreviated it and skipped a couple just to be able, to not run out of oxygen.
It's a 2-hour show.
Yeah. I know you're suffering as it is. But just to say, there's even more text than that. There's a little bit. You certainly got all of the gist of it in there. And I want people to know that there's even more. You can go in depth and download the cartoon for yourself, I guess.
It's an abbreviated pundit cartoon.
Where did you find it?
Somebody sent it to me, and then I found it on Mr. Fish's site.
Okay, so maybe we can, I'll poke around, and then we can include it in the roundup, and everyone can read the entirety of the block of text and or send it to their relatives for themselves.
Oh, I have it, so I will send it.
Okay, I will do nothing. I will passively await the dispatch, and then I'll give it to you. Okay, all right. Well, how are you holding up so far?
So far, I think I'm going to last till about 9:30.
Okay.
And then I think I'm done.
All right. Get some fluids.
My voice is starting to go. There's the link from whence it comes. And here are some of the other things I thought were worthwhile of at least bringing up this morning.
Certainly.
Okay. For example, Gershon Baskin, who's one of the negotiators, who has long experience between Israel and Hamas, as an Israeli negotiator, says there's no deal until there's a deal. And even then there's no deal until the Israeli government votes for it. We saw that yesterday. And even then there's no deal until it's implemented, and there are many ways for it to go south before then, so mercy on the families, and talking about it too much doesn't help, which Biden knew and didn't talk about. Yeah. So I think that's all wise. Let's just see how it all plays out, in other words. Next, The Guardian has a piece. Wisconsin Supreme Court appears poised to strike down the gerrymandered setup for the internal state district lines in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is the least democratic state in America. The Republicans have set it up so that Democrats can't win.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
And the 4 Supreme Court judges who tend to be liberal, because you're not allowed to say that it's partisan.
Right.
In Wisconsin. It's a nonpartisan Supreme Court with 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans.
Yeah.
And the Republicans were really upset because they're losing. And they were like screaming at the Democratic judges because they hate to see their power disappear. But that's what's happening.
Scream at judges. That's the way our legal
system
system
works. So I sent you the story from the Wisconsin Supreme Court from The Guardian. Very, very good.
I have it. I can read it.
Next is Bolt's magazine pointing out Democrats held off the GOP in legislative races this year. They did really well. Again, it's an off year. You expect the party out of power to do better in the off year elections. That didn't happen. It wasn't like a super huge win for Democrats everywhere, but the fact that they won it all is, again, you have to compare it to what? You have to compare it to figuring they'll lose. But
end of World War II.
Just like 2022.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's almost a wave-ish sort of thing.
Yeah. Susan Demis, writing in Michigan Advance, points out conservatives really don't want to take no on abortion. In other words, people in Ohio and other places, despite the fact that the people told them what they want, still are trying to rig things so that the conservatives get their way because they want a conservative theocracy.
Yeah. Give the people what we want them to want.
And then finally, this piece is really good. It's from Columbia Journalism Review called Warped Front Pages. Researchers examine the self-serving fiction of objective political news. How they skip, telling people why and where people stand on issues and instead just go with horse race. It's really quite good.
All right. Perhaps we can review it. Thank you for hanging in there as long as you have, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Talk to you after the holidays.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm looking around, still no activity here. I'm starting to wonder whether I should be waking people up so that there is ambiance added to our program. Let's see. I wanted to at least consider reading through the rest of the story we began with yesterday and didn't make it all the way through. All of the Israel-Palestine stories are by necessity extremely long. But yesterday we were reading from Jewish Currents. Remember this very interesting story by Maya Rosen about the unusual reversal of fortunes, I guess you could say, the reversal of the usual expected political role played by the families of hostages in a situation like this, that traditionally it had been the case that when hostages are taken by anybody, but when Israeli hostages are taken, and they are typically taken then by Palestinian or certainly sympathetic Palestinian or forces sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I don't know how the hell we're trying to be like too delicate out here, but look, when you take hostages, I think it's fair to say that you're basically talking terrorist. And sure, you can reverse that and talk about the people snatched up off the streets and thrown in Israeli jails that way, if that helps you conceptualize, or it brings you to the table to talk about these things. But anyway, what I mean here is that traditionally there is one way and one way only that the Israeli public reacts to the families of people being held hostage, and that is unwavering support, absolutely unified in their demands to bring people home, and will go way out of their way to make any deal to do that, including in the past releasing people who are sitting in Israeli jails who are in fact already convicted or who are confessed of being part of these terrorist operations, or who have been convicted for past terrorist attacks, or sometimes people who are in jail for no particular reason, certainly. But they'll release just about anybody in exchanges like this. And that's just sort of been part of the ethos. And that has now been reversed in a very short span of time and in very surprising fashion, such that the families of hostages who are demanding essentially the kind of diplomacy that the United States, I guess, has been participating in the hopes of bringing about an agreement for an exchange like the one that's supposed to be taking place today, find themselves instead viewed as traitors to the cause, and how somehow I guess this is supposed to give you really an indication of, one, how very, very different the Israeli ultra-right is in the way they think about this and every conflict, and two, how much more influence they're gaining. They were always there, and there were probably always a few people who would, in fact, have done this with the families of the hostages in previous situations, but either their voices were drowned out or they just simply did not have the leverage to get any sort of coverage for their protest of the families. But this is a sort of a new thing here, and it tells you again how far gone the Israeli far right actually is in all this. So let's see, where did we leave off? We read all the way through. We noted that there are approximately 240 hostages, and that's going to be a problem in accounting for people. But at least here now, and maybe that's why this particular exchange has been negotiated in this way. There are 50 or so people that they absolutely expect to see, and I guess there's hard parameters for this release, and it will be, I guess, relatively easy to tell whether or not the terms of the bargain are being lived up to. But of course, then, as we said, Spencer Ackerman's warning that West Bank settlers may feel that they are not bound by this agreement, and I guess they may not be. I haven't seen the text of the agreement, and even if I did, who knows if I'd be able to read it. But the likelihood that they would use this opportunity to screw things up is pretty substantial, given that they don't even, their representatives anyway, in the Israeli government apparently don't actually agree, not all of them, to the idea of the ceasefire and the exchange. And they certainly don't believe that there's anybody who can tell them that they can't deal with West Bank Palestinians however they care to deal with them, including killing them for no reason, because that's the sort of thing that they've been getting away with for quite a while. So I think we left off around here. Let's see if I can. We definitely talked about, mentioned Roy Cohen, the writer for 972 magazine, which I don't know what that is. Is that? I'm wondering if that's is that a telephone country code for Israel by some chance? I don't know. Anyway, so we were around here when we left off, and then we can really pick up some of this information here that coming in the next paragraph or so that I think is extremely important to understanding some of the situation. So despite their other disagreements, we'll pick up here, many of the families have publicly supported exchanging Palestinian prisoners for the captives in Gaza. Before the war, Israel held close to 5,200 Palestinian prisoners, and in the past month, the number is believed to have risen to roughly 7,000. In addition to the approximately 130 captured Hamas militants, being held for atrocities committed on October 7th. Israel has arrested roughly 2,000 Palestinians in the West Bank since the onset of the war. And so there, too, that also, is that covered? Will they be releasing any of the Palestinians arrested in the West Bank in this exchange, or is it entirely limited to Gaza? And how will Palestinians and the rest of the world view this if they agree to an exchange, Hamas agrees to an exchange in Gaza, and Israel just keeps snatching up people from the West Bank instead and saying, all right, well, now we'll hold, in the end, you'll hold 50 less prisoners, Israeli prisoners, or I guess dual citizen prisoners, or non-citizen prisoners even, and we'll hold another 1,000 somehow. Like, shouldn't the total number go down? I don't know if that's part of the agreement or not. Anyway, Gershon Baskin, a political analyst who was central to the negotiations that brought about the release of Gilad Shalit. Remember, that was the kidnapped soldier from a couple of years ago for whom they exchanged, I believe, thousands of prisoners. Well, Gershon Baskin has argued for freeing these prisoners, including the West Bank prisoners, and including the 559 convicted of killing Israelis in the so-called everyone for everyone deal that was proposed by the hostage families. If we want to get all the hostages home, there is no other option, he told me. And by the way, imagine the political tensions being created, maybe, possibly, though it's also possible that they could rise above them, among the families of the hostages who are not being released. Well, why not me? Well, I think they understand the categorizing of the different hostages. But still, they must be wondering, well, why not, when are they going to get around to freeing my family members too? I mean, I think they pretty clearly understand why the prioritization, but I don't know if it helps them feel any better. Hamas's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, hopefully I got that pronunciation close to correct, although Hamas's leader. Okay. Anyway, he's expressed openness to this arrangement, the everyone for everyone idea. But so far, Netanyahu has rejected such deals outright. Each time a deal would go back to Netanyahu, it would come back with tougher demands, one source familiar with the negotiations told The Guardian. And as little as I care for Netanyahu, you can see how and why that might be happening, including the fact that, of course, well, if Hamas comes to learn that if they launch a terrorist attack, whether at this scale of October 7th or not, if you launch a terrorist attack and your operatives who aren't killed are arrested, you can jump the border, snatch up some Israelis, and get them released. So there's zero penalty for trying to launch a terrorist attack. If they snatch you up and arrest you, we'll snatch up some Israelis and get them back, and that's got to be weighing on Netanyahu's mind, even though he's probably more concerned with himself. Now, Noy, who's the last name of a source in this piece that we mentioned yesterday, but of course you and I both will likely have forgotten who that was, and I'll see if I can scroll back a little bit to, if I don't have to go too far. There we are. Orly Noy, journalist and commentator on the situation, who chimes in here, and to where we got to get back to where we jumped away from. Okay. How far did I scroll? There we go. All right, just to figure out who Noy was. Noy, the journalist and commentator, said that Netanyahu has been significantly weakened by the intelligence failures of the October 7th attack and, quote, cannot politically allow the photos of Palestinian prisoners being released. His base won't accept it, even if it means the lives of all the hostages. And remember, again, important to note, who's his base? In this case, again, it's the people who allowed him to put together a governing coalition by joining with Likud here, and it is the ultra-right, and in some cases ultra-orthodox, but ultra-right-wing settler family parties, essentially. And the members of the cabinet whom Greg mentioned earlier in the show, who, we're not going to allow for that. We can't survive having pictures of these Palestinians being released. So how does he deal with this? His base won't accept it. Israelis are quick to point out, and this is where it becomes political in a slightly different way. Israelis are quick to point out that Sinwar himself, a key architect of the October 7th attacks, was released in the Shalit deal. Remember, again, that soldier released a couple of years ago, and when so many prisoners were released in exchange for the one Israeli soldier. Well, you released him, and he went back to Gaza, and he masterminded the October 7th attacks, and, that's going to make things difficult for them in Israel, too. In this context, the government has appeared ambivalent about whether to exchange in negotiation, or rather to engage in negotiations at all. As Israel's national security advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, said at an October 14th press conference, "We have no way to conduct negotiations with an enemy whom we want to wipe off the face of the earth," which is, of course, a reflection of how Hamas feels about Israel. You have two sides that want, feel compelled, it's their, reason for being, to wipe the other off the face of the earth. That's not a great atmosphere for negotiations, and you can't hold out a great deal of hope that anything will happen. And so I guess here the importance of perhaps the U.S. and Joe Biden in particular weighing in on this and saying, well, you're going to have to find something. You got to give the world something here. The world demands it. And the world did demand some sort of cessation of hostilities, however you want to call it, for some sustained period of time. And there was really no reason why you should have expected the Israeli government to come to their senses and accept it. And yet they did. So what does it tell us? So even as it resists pressure to negotiate, the government has argued that its commitment to war is not incompatible with the effort to recover the hostages. If there is no military pressure on Hamas, nothing will progress, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told the families of hostages on October 29th. And again, that's a defensible position too, right? If we cease the military pressure on Hamas, and of course, as a result, everyone who surrounds them, intentionally or not, then there would be no particular incentive for them to come to the negotiating table, particularly if they know that they can hold out for an everyone for everyone deal. But of course, I don't know, perhaps international diplomatic pressure for an everyone for everyone deal increases in the absence of pressing the military case. But then again, maybe not. So I don't know. All right. Netanyahu has also said that military action in Gaza, quote, actually creates the possibility of getting our hostages out. The rescue of Ori Megidish, a 19-year-old Israeli soldier who was recovered by Israeli military forces on October 29th, was taken by Netanyahu's supporters as proof that a ground invasion is the path to freeing the hostages. Well, one, anyway. Whether or not a ground invasion works 240 more times is a big question mark. Videos circulated online of celebrations outside Megidish's home with people joyfully shouting, "Bibi, King of Israel." But experts doubt that a larger rescue is possible through force, as Baskin has routinely argued. Even after Megidish's rescue, the only way to bring the hostages home alive is through a negotiated agreement with Hamas. Some Israelis suspect that the government would have responded differently. This is where the politics gets really interesting. Some Israelis suspect the government would have responded differently if the majority of the hostages had been among its voters rather than on the political left. And this is one of the interesting realities of domestic politics on the ground in the area. Now, I'm viewing this through the American framework of, and I know they're entirely different situations and a poor comparison just in terms of the gravity of the situation. But think about this if you need context, in terms of Chris Christie's pronouncement. Time for some traffic, it wasn't his pronouncement, his aide's pronouncement. Time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee. I don't think that I don't know whether if they knew that people were going to actually die as a result, I don't know whether they would have gone through with it or not. But between that or think of it in terms of what the Trump White House allegedly said to one another and thought among themselves with respect to the early stages of COVID. Well, it's killing their voters. It's in blue cities that this thing is happening. Red America is more, for whatever reason, they thought just wasn't going to get it. It wasn't going to impact them. Then, of course, they told them don't mask, don't get injections, etc. And then far more of them ended up dying. That's bad policy from a different angle. But Republicans and the right wing here in the United States, well, we have some experience of them saying we don't mind if their voters get punished in all of this. In fact, the base demands that their voters get punished. So what are we finding out here? The suspicion is that the government would have responded differently if the hostages had been among their voters, i.e., West Bank settlers. Remember that the bulk of Israel's forces were deployed toward the West Bank and with their backs to Gaza for a number of reasons, not the least of which, two major loci, I guess, of the reasons. One, Hamas actively attempting to lull the Israelis into a false sense of security and imply that they weren't interested in military confrontation across the border. And two, that it didn't matter whether they were active or not because Netanyahu's base is in the West Bank and among the settlers, and he wants to protect them, and that's where the forces are deployed because he depends on them for support, and he finds almost none on the other side of the country. Here, it goes on to say in the article, while Netanyahu's Likud party was the leading party nationally in Israel's last elections, it received between 3% and 7% of the vote in the area around Gaza, which actually suffered the brunt of the attacks on October 7th. Let me see how we can do with the pronunciation of the areas. Be'eri, Nir Oz, Kfar Aza, Nahal Oz, and Holit. Several of the kibbutzim that suffered the worst attacks on October 7th. In other words, and I think we've mentioned this more in passing than anything else, but the vast majority of the Israelis living in the area that hardest hit on October 7th are in fact among the most supportive of peace deals, two-state solution, recognition of a Palestinian state, not necessarily sympathetic with the cause of Hamas in any way, shape, or form, but of the Palestinian civilian population of Gaza, yes. Workers from Gaza who very frequently cross the border there and unfortunately, worked in a lot of these areas and apparently, according to the intelligence sources, didn't necessarily participate in the attacks, but apparently drew maps of the area for people who were going to participate in the attacks. It's a bit of a close betrayal in all of that. And you could go back to, I guess if you search back in history, who betrayed who first, I don't know, chicken, egg, but it happened. And it also happened that the biggest locus of support for some sort of deal sympathetic to Palestinian Gazans was right there, and they wiped them out. They killed a large number of Israelis who withheld their votes quite intentionally from the right wing and who were, in fact, many of them peace activists themselves. And in many cases, of course, to no avail. Certainly on October 7th, bullets don't have names on them. It didn't make a difference. They machine gunned people regardless of whether they had spent their entire lives seeking a peaceful solution or not. It has come to bear in some cases, I think, in some of the hostage situations. I understand that some of the families have released, and it might have come from this article, have released photos, for instance, of the rooms of teenage hostages that are decorated in calls for peace or that demonstrate, for instance, allegiance to Jewish Voices for Peace or other similar organizations that are, as Jewish organizations go, the closest thing you can get to pro-Palestinian anywhere. And now they're hostages or dead, and it puts a real hole in the left-wing coalition among Israeli voters. I mean, a seriously large number of them were killed. And you tend to wonder about the long-term wisdom of that from the Hamas perspective. But certainly Hamas has had no real intention of, we should be thinking about how we play in Israeli elections. That's not their mandate, whatever. But it's important to know. And it's important to know that Netanyahu likewise says, if they were wiped out, well, for one thing, there would be fewer of them at the polls. And two, those that remain might, in his view, have their eyes opened to the real danger and become significantly more right-wing. To whose advantage is any of this? I don't know. But that's the fact here that Netanyahu's Likud party got about 3 to 7% of the vote in this area. And some of the hostages are well-known left-wing activists, including Yocheved and Oded Lifshitz, the former of whom was released on October 24th, who regularly drove Gazans to Israeli hospitals for medical treatment. Many more hold similar views. The family of 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Polin, for example, posted photos, there we are, of his bedroom in Jerusalem as he left it before heading to the dance party where he was later kidnapped, decorated with a poster bearing the words, "Jerusalem is everyone's," in Hebrew, English, and Arabic, along with Antifa, by the way, and pro-refugee stickers. As Mayrav Zonzin, I'm trying my best on these pronunciations, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, a research and policy think tank, told me, Netanyahu's seeming antipathy towards the families of the hostages makes you wonder whether they would have been more of a priority if they were among his base. In a crass articulation of this point, which he now denies making, right-wing member of Knesset Simcha Rotman said on November 1st that the blood of 2 religious settlers killed in February in the West Bank, quote, is redder than that of those killed on October 7th. So, by the way, if you want to, point to various counterexamples, there are Israelis who downplay the October 7th losses, just as we find that there are Palestinians or Palestinian sympathizing Americans or whoever who likewise downplay the October 7th losses. They have compatriots among the right wing in Israel. Just to show you, the horseshoe theory applies everywhere. The partisan tenor of the hostage issue has been on display, with members of opposition parties acting far faster than the governing coalition to call for the hostages' release. In a representative example, Merav Michaeli, the head of the center-left Labor Party, whose name I should probably have gotten correct as a result, first posted about the hostages on October 8th, calling out members of the government for not having met with hostage families, which, again, remember that the usual practice is that's the photo op you want to have right away. That's the side you want to cleave to in any crisis. It doesn't matter what their politics are. The families of hostages were political gold in the crassest in the crassest sense possible, I guess, but not this time. So, Michaeli here, the head of the center-left Labor Party, calling out the government for not having met with hostage families, while Itamar Ben-Gvir, the head of the far-right Jewish Power Party, that's some name for your party, which is in the governing coalition, and the guy previously mentioned by Greg, did not post about the hostages at all until October 30th, and in that case only to celebrate the rescue of Megiddish. Even more tellingly, in the month since the attacks, Netanyahu has held only 2 meetings with the families of hostages, and in each case he sat down with just 4 or 5 families, probably carefully selected, none of whom were from the kibbutzim near the Gaza border, U.S. President Joe Biden is believed to have spent more time talking to the families of the hostages than Netanyahu has. And the families widely credit him with the release of the first two hostages, U.S. citizens Judith and Natalie Raanan. Multiple family members reported asking to participate in the meetings with Netanyahu and being denied. It's clear that there's a closed clique here that decides who meets with the prime minister and who doesn't. It's not unexpected, I guess. And usually it's the same parents and the same names. One father of two children being held hostage who asked to remain anonymous so as not to harm efforts to bring back his children, told the Israeli newspaper Israel Hayom. I don't know how many people have two children being held hostage. I don't know if that narrows the scope of who it might be. Maybe it's not that anonymous anymore. Anyway, that was his choice. He speculated that he had been kept out because the government recognized his unwillingness to perform for the press in a spectacle intended to serve Netanyahu. Maybe they know that I'll turn over tables there, he said. Even the organization that has brought the families together, the headquarters of the families of the kidnapped and missing persons, known simply as the headquarters, has come in for criticism from some of the families themselves, who point out that its founders included Likudniks close to Netanyahu. Journalist Nirit Anderman wrote in Haaretz that something at the headquarters isn't working right, accusing the organization of acting with a certain uncertain calm, when it should be raising a voice of rage that shakes this land. On October 29th, two senior officials publicly resigned from their roles at the headquarters, criticizing the organization for ensuring that only right-wing families could gain access to the prime minister. One of those who resigned, David Maidan, a former Mossad official, as it turns out, who served as Netanyahu's representative in the Shalit deal, by the way, said in interviews that by creating photo ops for the prime minister to project his concern for the families, while protecting him from pressure from those who don't share his politics, the headquarters is providing a comfortable, bulletproof vest for him. Meanwhile, suffering the slings and arrows of right-wing Israeli outrage, I should point out. All right, we'll take a 1-minute break at the top of the hour here, which is, coming up right now, and return to this article. I don't know, I find it insightful. Hopefully you do too. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this reading. I find it, helpful and enlightening in a way that, I hope it's similar for you. This is a good holiday week content, if you ask me. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Well, evidence has emerged that Netanyahu's few meetings with families have been carefully choreographed. I think we should all expect that, for political purposes. During the first meeting on October 15th, several previously unannounced people appeared, identifying themselves as family members of hostages, even though they were not a part of the group at the headquarters. One man who told the room that his daughter was a hostage urged Netanyahu to, quote, act coolly and decisively. I love my daughter no less than the rest of the people in this room love their own family members, but in the end, we have to think of the people of Israel and the future of our existence. That's not usually what you hear from families of the kidnapped, but, any number of people might, in fact, be in that group, since there are so many who were kidnapped. Jackie Levy and Noam Don, who have multiple family members being held hostage and were at the meeting, said in an interview that they felt, quote, there was inappropriate political opportunism here, unquote, and called the unannounced party's invitation an intentional move to sow dispute among the families. Although Netanyahu's office has claimed that it had nothing to do with the group's surprise appearance, Haaretz, the newspaper, found that their arrival was indeed planned in advance, though it's no word on who planned it, but you might guess. 3 of the surprise meeting attendees later identified themselves as Tzvika Mor, Eliyahu Libman, and Ditza Or, settlers. Oh, well, didn't we come across that name? Or was that maybe not. Maybe that's someone else's, I just recognize the same first name, Ditza. But that was, one of them was a hostage. one of the elderly hostages, as I recall. But at any rate, it enlightens things by finding out that they are settlers from Kiryat Arba and Shiloh in the occupied West Bank, all of whom have sons who were taken hostage. The three have since gone on a media blitz arguing that there should be no hostage deal, even if it means sacrificing their sons' lives. It's our children, and we are saying to the Jewish people that taking care of our children shouldn't come at the expense of the war. Unbelievable, but it was said. That was Moore, which one, Zvika Moore, said in an interview in the Haredi radio station Kol Barama. Haredi meaning ultra-Orthodox. And so I guess now you know where that's coming from. Libman said he doesn't sleep at night for fear of a hostage deal. For fear of a hostage. How do you like that? They got to follow up with them now. These terrorists will murder Jews. Is there no conscience, no morality? He asked in a radio interview with Khan, K-A-N, the Israel Public Broadcasting Corporation on October 29th. Of course, they don't spell it K-A-N. It's in Hebrew, but that's my best note for you. Anyway, Orr has hit similar notes in interviews. And again, Orr is the surname of Ditza Orr, in case that sentence was otherwise confusing for you. We must beat terror, not talk with it or compromise with it or let it pause between rounds to get armed anew, she told the religious Zionist news network Artuz Shiva on October 16th. The Libman and Moore families have both signed on to a letter along with 11 families whose children were killed on October 7th, urging war until victory. And actually, aren't we more familiar with that formulation in the United States? We don't negotiate with terrorists. That's not been the history of what goes on in Israel, but you'd think, I think it was probably the assumption of most Americans who maybe weren't too familiar with the situation there. And I'm not too familiar, really, with that situation either, but it might have been your assumption that, certainly the Israelis are probably even more militant about the we don't negotiate with terrorists line than Americans are. And it turns out, actually, it's the opposite. But now it seems the right wing, anyway, is attempting to adopt that line and to force it on everyone else. The religious settler families notwithstanding, most of the hostages' relatives have made it clear that they blame Netanyahu for their loved ones' plight. Mostly, I guess, because they come from the 95 to 97% of the local southern Israeli population that didn't throw any support at all to Likud in the elections. It's pretty overwhelming. But if you happen to live elsewhere and have family members who live down there who may or may not be among the 3 to 7% voting Likud, after all, then you tend to feel a little differently. Okay. Many have criticized the prime minister for appointing a hostage envoy, broadly considered unfit for the position, Gal Hirsch, a former military commander who was forced to resign over censure of his conduct during the Second Lebanon War. A Haaretz editorial slammed the choice as, quote, showing that Netanyahu has no serious intention of working to free the hostages, unquote, and reports suggest that Hirsch has actively gotten in the way of his supposed mission, for example, by failing to respond to communication from Qatar's envoy to Gaza about the possibility of releasing hostages. And that was the offices through which a lot of this was, in fact, facilitated today's agreement. I don't think they appointed the right people, Hyman Mina told me. There are people who know how to do this and have dealt with these kinds of deals. This is a political appointment and not a professional one. I'm really angry. There's no one to trust here. More broadly, many Israelis feel, as Haaretz journalist Uri Mizgav has put it, the hostages are a living emotional remnant of Netanyahu and his government's terrible abandonment and negligence, specifically of the intelligence failure that made the October 7th attacks possible and the military failure that allowed the attacks to last the long hours that they did, which, again, viewed now in the light of information showing that there was virtually no Likud support coming from that area of the country that was suffering the brunt of the ground attacks throws a different light on things. Further, military forces that are usually stationed in the area of the Gaza periphery had been moved to the West Bank to protect settlers, as we've been saying, in the West Bank. Anger toward the government has been widespread in Israel, with Netanyahu's already low ratings plummeting since the Hamas attack. According to a recent poll by Channel 13 News, 76% of Israelis think Netanyahu needs to resign. That's an awful lot. A call that's been echoed by important former military and political officials. The phrase, Bibi is a murderer, as opposed to the one we heard earlier, Bibi, King of Israel. That's some polarization for you. Bibi is a murderer has been trending on Twitter in Israel. And videos circulating in Israeli media show Israeli ministers getting heckled in recent weeks at hospitals, schools, and hotels where survivors are being housed, and even at the funerals of those killed on October 7th. According to Baskin, in contrast to during the Shalit negotiation, there's very, very low confidence in the ability and the reasonableness of Netanyahu making decisions today. He's not trusted even by people in his own party. Perhaps the most damning denunciation has come in the form of recent videos of the hostages released by Hamas. The videos, not the hostages. In a video made public on October 30th, Daniel Aloni from Kibbutz Nir Oz castigates Netanyahu for the October 7th attacks. We are carrying your political, security, and military failure because there was no army there. No one came. No one protected us, she yells. She calls repeatedly for a ceasefire and prisoner exchange, demanding, free us now, free their citizens, free their prisoners, free us all. In the most recent video, released November 9th, Hannah Katzir, also from Kibbutz Nir Oz, similarly blames Netanyahu and calls for a negotiated deal for the release of the hostages, while 13-year-old Yagil Yaakov thanks protesters in Tel Aviv for pressuring the government for his release. I want to tell Netanyahu that it's just unbelievable. All these explosions are just crazy. You are killing children and you are even killing prisoners, he says. Netanyahu, I want to tell you that if something happens to me, it's on your conscience. This is a 13-year-old. Tellingly, the Israeli government and news outlets have decided not to air the videos, saying they do not want to promote propaganda. Immediately, of course. I mean, certainly if you are inclined to think that way, hostage videos released by terrorists taken of their captors are rarely, taken at face value. But anyway, Noy argues that this reflects an attempt by the government to control the discourse, noting any sign of life from the hostages could bring the public to put pressure on the government to release them while there's still a possibility they're alive. That's an interesting twist, too. Israel has dismissed the hostage videos as cruel psychological propaganda and psychological terrorism. But even as they are filmed under coercive, even as they are filmed under coercive circumstances, their message is identical to one most of the hostages' families have put forward, and things that they practiced even before October 7th, actually, unequivocally assigning the blame for October 7th attacks to Netanyahu and calling for him to prioritize the hostages' safe return. We've been abandoned by our government twice. Hadass Calderon, whose two children, Sahar and Erez, are being held hostage, told the AP on October 7th and now, because our children are still there. Avichai Brodetz, whose wife Hagar and three children, Ofri, Yuval, and Uriah, are being held hostage, yelled at a Likud member of Knesset, Boaz Bismuth, on television. Do you know why my family was kidnapped? Not because of Hamas, because there was no army there to protect me. The problem is you, not Hamas. Well, I don't know about that. It involves Hamas. You're going to have to admit that. Despite the government's intransigence, more than a month into the war, support for a hostage deal appears to be growing in Israeli society, and of course we see the results today. 3 weeks ago, the hostages were a non-issue. The public was ready to sacrifice anything and everyone in order to make Hamas pay for what they did, Baskin told me on October 30th. But there's been an amazing shift in a very short period of time, and several shifts, in fact, because the public understands the clock is running out. This is evident in recent polling. according to a recent survey by the Israel Democracy Institute, IDI. 43% of the Israeli public supports a prisoner exchange, while 39% oppose it, and 18% do not know, apparently. Another IDI survey, which collected responses 3 times between October 15th and November 6th, shows that support for negotiations with Hamas has grown steadily in recent weeks. Meanwhile, a recent poll by Ma'ariv showed that 62% of the Israeli public supports a humanitarian ceasefire if tied to a hostage deal. 16% in exchange for the release of some hostages, 39% in exchange for the release of all hostages, 4% in exchange for information about hostages, and 3% regardless of the release of hostages at all. Baskin emphasized that it took 5 years for the Shalit deal, which was first proposed in 2006, to gain sufficient public and political support, but warned that those currently held in captivity do not have the luxury of time. As the days slip by, the hostages have been invoked in endless forms of public art. Their faces and names are plastered on posters, on walls, and lampposts. An art installation of close to 240 empty beds set up next to the Jerusalem City Hall has since been traveling across the country. A Shabbat dinner table with hundreds of empty chairs has been set up outside the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, and empty baby strollers line the streets. Blindfolded teddy bears are also meant to represent the hostages, as are red balloons and yellow ribbons. One activist group, simply called Hostage Exchange Now, that came together in the days after October 7th, wrote that, quote, "The country is full of art installations and events that have the style of Memorial Day events," unquote, when the country honors those killed in war, and more, quote, "which distract us from the critical and immediate demand for action towards the return of hostages and an exchange. The hostages don't need balloons or art displays. This is how we normalize what now needs to be prevented, to accustom us to disaster." They instead called for clear statements, calls, and demands from the Israeli government to do a prisoner exchange deal now, not tomorrow. Despite comments to ABC News by an unnamed Israeli official on November 14th that there had been progress in prisoner exchange negotiations between Israel and Hamas, on Wednesday evening, November 15th, sources announced that the negotiations had reached an impasse over various issues, including the length of the ceasefire and Israel's use of surveillance drones through its duration. There is optimism that both sides want to reach a deal, but we've been in this position twice in the last few weeks and the deal blew up, a source told Haaretz. Of course, now we have one. Whether or not it covers the use of drones during its duration, I don't know, but you can see how that might be less than confidence-inspiring for people in Gaza. But on the other hand, you can see how the Israeli government might insist on being able to use at least surveillance drones to be sure that the terms of the ceasefire were being met and that there was no activity in Gaza that looked like it was being made in preparation for breaking the ceasefire or renewing hostilities afterwards, although I guess you're entitled to do that afterwards. I don't know. Whether or not the current deal succeeds, a large number of hostages will remain captive in Gaza, and that means that a gulf may continue to widen between an Israeli government committed to continued war and a public that, according to crisis groups Zonsign, is increasingly indignant about the way the captives have been consigned to be collateral damage. While there remains consensus support for Israel's efforts to defeat Hamas militarily, Zonsign said that much of now it straightens out who that crisis group's Zonsign said that much of the Israeli public feels that the imperative to bring home the hostages is just as or even more important. There's a real split between the government's harsh military political strategy, which is not prioritizing the hostages, and the public, which is. So far, however, that feeling has not translated into widespread opposition to the government's relentless bombardment, leaving the hostages' families fighting a lonely fight. At a protest in Jerusalem on November 4th, Noam Dan, who has multiple relatives among the hostages, accused Netanyahu and the war cabinet of casting the hostages and their families as a burden on military action. She insisted that it was the government, not the families, that should feel ashamed, asking, what is wrong with your world that you don't understand the weight of this hour? All right, that was rather lengthy, but I think hopefully rather insightful. And I don't know, I found it interesting. And gosh, there's more, but so much more that I don't know how much fits in one show. But we got to spread it across 3. But there's plenty to go. Let's stick with the theme, since we're already, all the way in, and running the risk of all sorts of contention and alienation. Let me throw this one in. I thought this was kind of interesting from a American perspective. In New York Magazine, Mark Harris writing an interesting thing about those posters that popped up outside of Israel, in this case in New York, bearing the faces of those kidnapped people who are hostages in Gaza and demanding their release. And the controversy that has arisen over those posters being torn down, and then subsequently the controversy that has arisen over people videotaping those posters so that they can catch the people who are tearing them down and out them, and just compounding the issues one after the other. But this is an interesting perspective, I think. The posters and me watching the angry, silent, futile proxy war. Mark Harris, again, writing in New York Magazine. I saw someone ripping down one of those kidnapped posters the other day. By the way, what's the date on this piece? November 20th, so just a couple of days ago. I saw someone ripping down one of those kidnapped posters the other day. I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of those posters. I have no idea whether the person ripping them down is Jewish, Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian, or none of the above. Honestly, their vibe was none of the above. The vibe, i.e., that's what they looked like to me. The vibe was college. What does this mean? Well, their expression was blank and even stony. I don't know if that means college, but the face people put on when someone asks them for money on the street and they are not going to make eye contact or break stride, but they still want to manifest the plausible deniability of cruel intention that adds up to a performance of civility. This is kind of interesting and insightful. This person was on a mission. Of course, this is just a guess, right? Part of the mission was that they were not going to engage about the mission. I wondered what the mission was. I don't know. I flinched when I saw the tearing down. It felt aggressive. Though I am as sure as I am sure of anything that this person probably did not think of themselves as aggressive and would have taken offense at the word. The next day, the posters were back up, now entirely covered in clear tape. If someone wanted to get rid of them, they would have to use a box cutter. Soon after that, they were box cuttered down, and soon after that, they were put up again in new places. This angry, silent, futile proxy war being fought by mostly anonymous combatants, lamppost by lamppost, feels like a perfect realization of the mistrust and non-communication that has seized much of this city since October 7th, a city shared by huge numbers of Muslims and Jews, though the visibility of the two groups is certainly not equal. I think I understand the impulse to pull the posters down. I assume it's a statement that for once, at least on this lamppost on this morning, the life of an imperiled Israeli civilian is not going to be privileged in public discourse over the life of a killed Palestinian civilian. I think it's a way of saying your suffering is not greater than their suffering in a city whose mightiest institutions have mostly treated Jews as an us and Muslims as a them. And perhaps those who believe the posters are propaganda intended not to simply make you look at them, but to make you look away from something else, are right. I mean, I do have that feeling occasionally too. Like you're not putting it up like, help me find this lost cat or find even this kidnapped person. They were kidnapped in Gaza. They're not going to turn up in New York. So it's not quite like that. So yet ripping them down still carries a personal cost. Even if unintentionally, it hardens one's heart. Its effect is, I don't want to see this person, or this pain is inconvenient to my argument. And I know that would really greatly upset a lot of the people who are tearing down those posters, particularly if they are, if they're right about the vibe being college, if they're none of the above, and they think that they're being humanitarian activists, and I'm sure that's their intent, but they would hate to be accused of it, and they would hate even more for it to ring true that, yeah, what this actually says is, I don't want to see this person. This pain is inconvenient to my argument. And they would insist, that's not what I'm doing, or that's not even true, but it might be. Anyway, and for some people, he continues, it is clearly a way of saying, I'm sick of being told to consider the suffering of Jews. Well, that would be of a more hard-hearted person. While old-fashioned heartland anti-Semitism is rising among the far right, as well as its celebrity strains, murdery Trader Green, he mentions here, Kanye West, and an occasional Elon Musk tweet, now more than occasional. It's an action that requires Jews to decode the sentiment behind it, if there is, in fact, only one sentiment. How do you decode whether a gesture is anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-propaganda, or none of the above? Whatever the reason or reasons, the gesture, one of unflinching certainty, feels dangerous right now. If you rip down a picture of someone who is suffering, if you convince yourself that rendering that person just a little less real to other people is a means to a righteous end, you are, I think, doing something menacing. Not menacing to the safety of Palestinians or Israelis, because let's be clear, the whole business of postering and unpostering is made thousands of miles away and in a cocoon of relative safety, but menacing to your own humanity. It feels akin to the ugliness of saying there are no Palestinian civilians, as some people say, like the West Bank settlers, or any other glib slur used to reinforce the idea that Palestinians are less than people and that therefore killing them must be less than murder. I would like to see the posters stay up, but with posters of Gazans on every lamppost alongside them, not to mention on storefronts, at construction sites, and in subway ad spaces. People would tear those down too, for sure. A city in which nobody could walk a block without being confronted and discomfited by the horrific and, let's acknowledge, wildly asymmetrical human cost of this war would be a better and perhaps more humane city. Probably. I don't know. I am not sure of much right now regarding October 7th and everything that has followed. I am not even sure where I stand with people, colleagues, friends, acquaintances, neighbors, whom I have long regarded as kindred spirits. I'm writing I a lot because we, with its assumption of shared experience, feels presumptuous these days, unearned, dangerous in itself. We has never been a word Jews can comfortably use about other Jews, certainly not in New York City. We are not just one thing. We are not just two things. We are a vast and divided populace united by one commonality that in practice is often not so common at all. And in fact, is often no commonality at all. There are things about which we have disagreed for so long that we don't speak to a lot of us anymore. We have nothing to say to one another. But what if I narrow we down, way down, all the way down from we Jews to we largely secular, culturally Jewish, diasporan, generally progressive, Netanyahu-rejecting, pro-two-state, pro-Palestinian autonomy Jews? There are a lot of us here. You've seen us at rallies and vigils and at the bottom of petitions and open letters and on MSNBC. We're fluent in that blank and pleasant and stony expression too. In fact, some of us are certainly the ones taking down the posters. We put on that face when we walk by Lubavitchers in the street asking us if we're Jewish, or by Jews who have nothing better to do than scream at us that we're bad Jews because they think unquestioning solidarity with Israel is some sort of enforceable law. A recent Jerusalem Post editorial simply announced that a lot of us are no longer Jews, which may represent, if nothing else, a touching belief in the power of the press. You know us. You work with us. We're your friends. We think you're our friends. Some of you are. And some of you are, but maybe only up to a point. Jews have long been used to being treated as a questionable minority by other minorities. But now, the number of people who think we're part of the problem is rising. Perhaps you are among the people. We're used to taking crap, we'll say, from those to the right of us, and we're used to giving it back in kind. What we're not used to is the other stuff, the stuff from parts of the left. The person we lately hear casually say Jews when they mean some Israelis. The same person who then catches themselves, or doesn't, occasionally that happens too. We're not used to any mention of lost Israeli lives being greeted with irritation, as if the mere act of acknowledgement constitutes straying off topic. People we know have come to resent the obligation to take in what Hamas did on October 7th as a kind of verbal toll they have to pay before they can talk about how bad it is to kill Palestinian civilians. Is it a toll? Is that what we're asking for? What we feel we're owed? Or are we just asking that all civilian dead be considered in the totality of horrific loss? Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KGrowX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just want to get this one all out, continuing with the New York article from Mark Harris. And, of course, I had to jump out in the middle of his sentence, although it was a pretty decent stopping point. But I'm going to back up just a little bit to set the scene for the conclusion of this passage. So as I said, he's pointing out what it's like for the mostly secular, culturally Jewish progressive types in New York. As he says, we're used to taking crap from those to the right of us, and we're used to giving it back in kind, all of that. But then there's this one passage, right? We know, have come to resent the obligation to take in what Hamas did on October 7th as a kind of verbal toll they have to pay before they can talk about how bad it is to kill Palestinian civilians. Is it a toll? Is that what we're asking for, what we feel we're owed? Or are we just asking that all civilian dead be considered in the totality of horrific loss? Pressed on three sides by old guard anti-Semites, by right-wing AIPAC-loving American Jews for whom allegiance to Israel and Israeli politics and policies is paramount, and by a subset of left progressives for whom we are now a suspect category of people whose bona fides need to be proved. It's little wonder that some Jews are retreating into silence. And that's where I'm living, for the most part. I mean, I don't, as much as I want to, sometimes engage, certainly not on social media over these things, because it's fruitless, and mostly I excuse myself from it by saying it is fruitless, and it's irritating, and people that I know who I think may even be wrong or approaching things from the wrong direction need space to be that way, and never going to change, and I accept that and I understand it, but they don't need me further irritating them about it. This is the way things are, but it's an interesting, and it's worth pointing out. And I think even the people who, Well, some people who need to hear the message and will not absorb it, period. But others will say, okay, I mean, I'm not changing my mind or my approach, but I'm glad I absorbed that. And I think that encompasses most of the listeners to a program like this one. We live in the age of trauma, he continues, as an entry ticket to any argument. So, since October 7th, Jews have made a lot of mention of generational trauma, of feeling unsafe, of the choking anxiety of being hated because of who we are. That is the linguistic currency of the 2020s, an essential form of self-credentialing if you want to be admitted into a discussion of oppression as a victim rather than as a perpetrator. But it's also the language of many decades ago, and it reflects one of the least talked about divides among American Jews, the chasm between Jews raised in a tradition of the belief in justice for all people, of solidarity with the oppressed, of the essentiality of fighting for the rights of others, and Jews who were instead raised on warnings. It could happen again. It could happen here. It could happen to us. Never assume safety. Never assume an ally is an ally. They can always turn on you. The border between those two groups is porous, and there's a lot of overlap. But for many on one side or the other, that gap is unbridgeable. Those extremes of how we relate to Jewish identity are crystallized, even calcified in childhood, rooted in parental psychology and often in irrefutable family history. Jews like me, the writer says, Jews who tend to resist the idea of claiming trauma, who came of age in a culture in which spotting anti-Semitism around every corner was a joke about old-world fearfulness. See, for instance, Alvy Singer's Jew Eat in Annie Hall, for those who understand the reference, are now paranoid about becoming paranoid Jews. That actually is a tough ending because I think I want more from this, but that's the totality of the article. We got to the end there. Expresses a lot, and a lot that I think is important to absorb in this atmosphere, and I hope you take it in the spirit in which it's offered, and don't spend too much time fighting about it. Take it for what it's worth. Take it with you. Hopefully you absorb something from it, just as everyone else has been called upon to absorb the messages coming from the 15 other sides and increasing to 30 and so on with every hour. So, okay, that's a lot to take in. There's a lot more that I want to share with you, and I don't know whether we turn more domestic or offer up something else here. This would be good for later in the week, but there's this interest. I don't know if we would get all the way through this one either, but just to change the focus a little bit. And since we've made most of today about interesting perspectives on the situation and things we might not have considered so far, or maybe things we've been thinking to ourselves, by ourselves the whole time, and we find it reflected in this. Here's something from New Lines magazine. This seems like a good time to shift the focus again, but still remain on this issue. Ready for this perspective? Iranians have become desensitized to the question of Palestine. You probably wouldn't have guessed this unless you were Iranian yourself. For the younger generation, the struggle over the occupied land is merely a rhetorical toy for the leadership to beef up its clout in the Muslim world. This I found really kind of fascinating, so therefore I'm going to force you to find it fascinating too. Koresh, ready for this one? Ziabari. Koresh Ziarabi. I've ruined it. Koresh Ziabari is the writer here, an award-winning journalist from Iran and a 2022 World Press Institute Fellow with the University of St. Thomas, just in case you wanted to look him up yourself. November 17th, 2023, providing something we haven't seen before on this issue. Not on this show anyway. When Hamas launched the first strikes into the Israeli towns and cities of Sderot, Herzliya, I didn't realize had been hit with this, Tel Aviv and Ashkelon On October 7th, state-sanctioned celebrations swept Iranian cities. Cookies and beverages were served in roundabouts. Barbecues were set up in parks. Fireworks around the Palestinian embassy in Tehran extended late into the night, and the iconic Azadi Tower was illuminated with the colors of the Palestinian flag, featuring Quranic verses about revenge on the criminals. Intelligence officials and experts are divided on whether Hamas has embarked on this costly adventure with the green light of the Islamic Republic or has acted of its own volition. What is incontrovertible is the footprint of the Iranian government in the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But we've given plenty of airtime and consideration over the years to the likelihood, in fact, the fact that Israelis are different from the Israeli government, Palestinians certainly different from their various governing bodies, in particular Hamas, but not much attention paid to how much distance there might be from the Iranian people at large and the Iranian government with respect to this. It was always understood that there would be differences between the Iranian people and their government, especially when we keep seeing every once in a while somebody pushing us to bomb Iran over something or another. And we say, well, the Iranian people are not the Iranian government. But I don't know that we ever really entertained the possibility that there was a chasm between the populace and its government on the question of Israel and Palestine. But why not? There is on everything, probably. And this too. So it's interesting to find this out. The leadership in Tehran judges itself to be the spiritual cheerleader of the Palestinian cause, even if that role has been unsolicited, and it is the primary financier of the militancy of Islamic Jihad and Hamas. For the past 44 years, its anti-Israel vendetta has formed the pillar of its foreign policy and has ruined its relations with other countries, including neighbors, because of their Israel ties or merely because of its perception of them being in Tel Aviv's orbit of influence. Iran is not alone in the community of Muslim states in its opposition to Israel for its occupation of Palestine, but the extreme lengths to which it has gone to tout itself as the principal standard bearer of the cause of Palestinian emancipation means it has singled itself out not just as an ally, but an outlier in how it has been reading and reacting to the evolution of the conflict. Although there may be clusters of Arab and Muslim public that relate to the Islamic Republic for its stance, the Iranian public has come to view the state's role as self-serving, exploiting a war over territory and identity overseas for the sake of its own global leverage. The outcome of the Iranian theocracy shoehorning itself into the conflict and making the reversal of the occupation a burning issue to which it dedicates unlimited assets and political capital is the disillusionment of the average Iranian who no longer believes the Palestinian cause is an ethical concern. I wouldn't have guessed that. If there was a genuine national consensus at the dawn of the 1979 revolution that resistance to Israel's policies was a moral and human responsibility, that commitment has been shredded thanks to the excesses of the Islamic Republic. For the younger generation, the struggle over the occupied land is merely a rhetorical toy for the leadership to beef up its clout in the Muslim world. And I guess here worth remembering that they are undisputedly the leaders of the Shiite Muslim world, but whether or not, the whole conflict between Israel and the Iran and the Gulf states, for instance, is over that divide between Sunni and Shia. Anyway, when the exiled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was sculpting the narrative of the revolution, he successfully rallied his adherents around the idea of antipathy to apartheid in South Africa, and this makes sense to people who make this comparison all the time, and Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, which is why he withheld diplomatic recognition from both countries after 1979. But what was marketed as a humanitarian principle at the outset morphed into fanaticism and was weaponized for strategic gains and lost luster. Many Iranian taxpayers reckon the military or the militant cliques in Gaza, as well as other Tehran proxies such as Lebanon's Hezbollah, are bottomless pits that consume their wealth immodestly. To them, the Palestinian ideal is a rival that has supplanted them as a priority when their government decides where to channel its wherewithal. It's not merely the disbursement of cash to transnational combatants that makes the constituents resentful. They're frustrated at the government's attention being almost entirely co-opted by a conflict they don't necessarily relate to, and one that has also incurred them consequential costs. Starting with the Green Movement of 2009, Iranians have been expressing their dismay at the ruling elite's preoccupation with the question of Palestine more vocally. Neither Gaza nor Lebanon. I'll give my life for Iran was one of the first slogans that emerged to challenge the regime's dogma. And more recently, when protesters vocalize their economic grievances, one of the recurring refrains they chant is, "Abandon Palestine." Abandon Palestine. Think of a solution for us. That is interesting. According to the State Department, Tehran hands out up to $100 million to Hamas every year. The figure isn't massive, but for a cash-strapped economy with shrinking access to dollar reserves and divested of most sources of external investment, this is not negligible, equaling almost 55% of the government budget allocated to the province of Guilan annually. And I don't know how I'm pronouncing that. And I guess they're just making a comparison to how much it costs to run the government of a province in Iran. This is for, I guess, a more Iran-aware audience. But anyway, it's not negligible, as they say. The funding set aside for Hezbollah is much more significant, totaling $700 million a year. The former U.S. envoy for Iran, Brian Hook, had said in 2019 that Iranian financing for its militias in Iraq and Syria totaled $16 billion. But over the course from 2012 to 2020, in that case. These generous payouts, however, haven't dramatically enhanced the public perceptions of Iran in the Arab world. Quite the contrary, as reported by the Arab Barometer, its favorability has fallen from a third to a quarter across different MENA countries, Middle East, North Africa countries, since 2013. In Palestine, only 34% of people support increased relations with Iran. In Yemen, where the Islamic Republic has been an unofficial belligerent in the grinding war between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, a mere 18% of the public is in favor of closer relations with Iran, even though they're paying for the whole war. Indeed, the Arab world is not a monolith, and there have been instances when Tehran's displays of bravado appealed to some communities in the region, especially the Shiite minorities in Lebanon and Syria. There is occasional commentary from Arab journalists and public figures who commend the Islamic Republic's leaders for their unapologetic denunciation of Israel and the West, but that's not a sentiment shared widely in the region or a gravitational pull binding Palestinians to the prospect of all-out ties with Iran. And we have to be reminded as non-Iranian readers here that Iranians are not Arabs. The Arab, Turkish, and Iranian public opinion 2011 to 2019 survey by Zogby Research Services found only 42% of Palestinians had favorable views of Iran. And when asked about the continued implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that eliminated the sanctions against Iran in return for the curtailment of its nuclear activities, a mere 19% said they supported the deal. That is an interesting mix of positions to take too. But again, only 42% of Palestinians had any favorable view of Iran, but Iran is sending their ostensible governing body, Hamas, $100 million a year to keep them alive. But probably because in Palestine, are they seeing any of the money? No, it's being used for military preparations by Hamas instead of being whatever, used in any other fashion. A familiar problem. for people of all countries. Like pretty much every other development these days, the war between Hamas and Israel has bifurcated Iranians over ideological and political lines, throwing their chronic divisions into sharp relief. The more conservative, religious-minded stalwarts of the Ayatollah, who don't camouflage their pro-government sympathies, are unreserved about cheering for Hamas as it pounds targets inside of Israel, and their line of thought continues to be inspired by the official discourse that Israel isn't entitled to exist. When Hamas launched its strike on October 7th, authorities didn't try to strike a diplomatic tone and sent congratulatory messages to their Hamas allies. In a statement, the Iranian mission at the United Nations subtly deflected responsibility for the attacks as speculation swirled around about the country's involvement. The foreign ministry in Tehran didn't like the wording of the text and insisted it was a flawed and imprecise narrative and interpretation of certain media, which was supposed to mean the Islamic Republic hadn't officially disavowed any role in brainstorming and orchestrating the Blitzkrieg. On the X social media platform, formerly known as Twitter, photos circulated of a mural in an undisclosed Iranian city reading in Persian, "Will respond to the riots in Tel Aviv," accompanied by captions like, "We had warned that we'll retaliate on the Israeli soil. They didn't believe." It's a little stilted, but there you have it. The inscription was apparently made during the nationwide uprising last year. It denoted the conspiratorial understanding shared by the government partisans that the Woman, Life, Freedom uprising, which they denigrate as the riots, were funded and encouraged by the United States and Israel. So it behooved the Islamic Republic to hit back by destabilizing Israel in its territory. A hot-headed 35-year-old TV anchor who has just been granted the coveted position of lecturer at one of the nation's most prestigious universities has been on a spree of publishing X posts disparaging Israel. One of his posts read, "Oh God, please ensure we'll die on the path of fighting the Zionists." Okay. Several users responded to him, most sarcastically, by saying he should pack his belongings and fly to Gaza to fight in the war, instead of fantasizing about an honorable death. Hateful speech has been spiraling on Persian social media over the ongoing explosion of violence in the Middle East. Although it can sound counterintuitive, Iranians are sparring over which side to take in a war between two remote, distinct geopolitical entities. As they are cleaved into hypothetical splinter groups, each camp dehumanizes its opponents through sardonic, degrading language. A pro-government influencer posted on Twitter, "Siding with Israel does no longer mean ignorance. It is a matter of being a bastard." I'm not even certain I can decode exactly what that means. The municipality of Tehran, under Alireza Zaghani, one of the nation's most hardline politicians who was catapulted to the position of mayor in acknowledgement of his loyalty to President Ebrahim Raisi, has raised eyebrows by erecting huge billboards across the town using the word bastard to label Israel. Even conservative commentators found fault with the language in the publicity for being vulgar and clearly inappropriate for content production to which people of different stripes, including children, would be exposed. The awkward municipality-sponsored propaganda has turned into a bone of contention, pitting capital dwellers against one another. But what is playing out in the public sphere and online space is a glaring outpouring of indignation against the government's framing of the ongoing war. The consternation complements a decades-long pattern of middle-class cynicism toward the Islamic Republic's patronizing role in the crisis. It's no surprise, then, that displays of solidarity and gestures of support for Israel, while it's being grilled even by some partners for the severity of its operations of reprisal, characterize the reactions of many Iranians to the unfolding drama. They don't necessarily intend to console Israel or underwrite its account of events. Their rejoinders are atypical forms of resistance against the theocracy that rules them. So it's an interesting reaction here. Because of their discontent with the ruling regime in Iran, They purposefully reject the Iranian government's position on Israel and embrace Israel instead. That's really, just wasn't expected. Not for me anyway. But that's what makes this article interesting and important. In a country where critical speech is criminalized and the government barely tolerates anyone who militates against its rock-solid convictions, voices arguing that the dominant discourse on Israel and Palestine is unpopular are growing in vehemence, often at the risk of their personal safety. Sadegh Zibakalam, a former Tehran University professor, is a noted academic who has long insisted that there's an alternative conceptualization of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that the Islamic Republic hides from its people. In 2021, he said in a viral Instagram interview, "I've said a number of times that there should be a survey asking our own people if they agree with the policy of annihilating Israel. I believe 80% of the Iranian people are opposed to this policy and don't have any issues with Israel." He has echoed the same thoughts in another online forum after the October 7th attack. His estimation is certainly a raw guess, but can be a token of the broader yet stifled trend of a substantial number of citizens feeling dismayed at a mode of governance that seeks empowerment through the perpetuation of hostilities against another state. On October 8th, one night after Hamas instigated the first attacks on Israeli soil, a group of pro-government fans brought large Palestine flags to the Azadi Stadium in Tehran, where the soccer clubs Persepolis FC and Gol Gohar Sirjan FC were scheduled to play. Not that important that we know the names of the teams, but there you go. As they unfurled the flags, assuming that a wave of solidarity would be generated, a large crowd of the spectators burst into a spontaneous chant with vulgar undertones, boiling down to the message that their gesture wasn't welcome and they had to wrap up the flag. An incident in 2020 that garnered international attention was probably one of the seminal examples of young Iranians declining to toe the government line, TOE, yes, on the question of Palestine and Israel. As university campuses joined the protests over the IRGC downing, the Revolutionary Guard, right, of downing of Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752. A sizable group of marchers outside the Shahid Beheshti University in Tehran refused to trample on a giant flag of Israel painted on the ground. The flag, of course, plastered on the pavement by the authorities so that pedestrians walking over it would disrespect the Israeli identity in the process. Although the protests were untethered from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at that point, the episode served as a case in point that flouting the sacrosanct government narrative on relations with Israel has often come to be viewed by many Iranians as a means of voicing their broader discontent against the clerical establishment and its actions. Social media continues to be a potent gauge of the people's most rebellious feelings about the current conundrum, as Twitter has unofficially dismantled the concept of content moderation on the platform. Obscene hashtags are trending, encapsulating the acrimony of dissenting Iranians who mockingly encourage government supporters to travel to Gaza to defend their ideological rampart. They accuse the prominent regime gurus of spinelessness, saying they have hidden themselves behind a smokescreen of bombast and flowery language. There's plenty of that in this article, the flowery language anyway, sensationalizing the situation while leaving it to the ordinary Iranians to face the consequences of their adventurism. The Twitter timeline of a state TV reporter who has been dispatched to southern Lebanon to report from the vicinity of the war hotspot in Gaza, this obviously the closest an Iranian citizen can get, has been deluged with sarcastic messages from users who have been wishing him swift martyrdom. The general public in Iran is seemingly paying the price for the Islamic Republic's embroilment in Palestinian affairs, either through enduring the punitive sanctions engendered by its support of Hamas and Hezbollah, or being dispossessed of assets that originally belonged to them but end up being expended on extraterritorial ambitions. with public places and cities being saturated with militant publicity for the Palestinian cause throughout the year, a constellation of events held at hundreds of universities and cultural institutions around the same theme, and state broadcasters bombarding the local viewers with hateful anti-Israel and anti-Semitic messaging routinely, many have had the realization that for the ruling elite in Tehran, Palestine is not just a foreign policy priority. Fomenting bitterness against Israel constitutes the crux of the thinking of the officials and the essence of speeches they make at home and in international forums, not only at times of crisis like this, but as a matter of regularity. At different United Nations forums, Iranian presidents and ministers are often seen speaking about Israel and Palestine more frequently than about their country. Inevitably, the trail of hard feelings that's left would be immense. There's still a considerable amount of this article left, though we are getting towards the end. But, of course, time for us to wrap things up today. Past time, of course, for us to wrap things up and hand it all over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio, and, of course, his tour of domestic and international affairs. And he, too, planning some sort of respite for himself, with holiday programming available on the Netroots Radio feed throughout, just to keep you company, no matter what we here or he there decides to do with respect to new programming for Thursday and Friday. But I, as you can see, am sorely tempted to continue in this vein and see what I can bring you. But I didn't get all the way through this one, but I think you got the gist of it, certainly. And I think important for us to note, and an interesting shift in perspective to the Iranian public, which, generally would be left out of this discussion. All right, well, here's what Justice has got on tap for you today. Despite all his whines of victimhood, parallel hearings exposed Trump's special treatment by the courts. A good point here. The California Supreme Court ruled Pacific Gas and Electric cannot be sued over safety-related power shutoffs due to wildfires. Okay. A right-wing NRA-funded rural judge ruled the voter-approved Oregon gun control law violates the state constitution. Another place where Republicans are looking to turn back the will of the voters on those state referenda. And how about a little bit more after this short announcement?
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
There's another court activity. The Missouri Supreme Court turned away an extreme right-wing appeal, thankfully, about how to word a ballot question on access to abortion in the state in an upcoming citizen initiative. And, of course, as always, a tour of issues internationally as well. Do stay tuned, and we'll see what we can do to see you again this week.